Everybody's heard of the TED Talks, right? Everybody has heard of TED Talks, raise your hand. Okay, so everybody's heard of TED Talks. But basically what we did was we patterned the Connect Talks after the TED Talks. We stole the idea. So what we have are several speakers. They're going to get 9 minutes each. And they're going to obviously talk about what's near and dear to their hearts. And we have, I think, assembled a really great series of speakers for these Connect Talks. So with that, let me introduce to you the first of these folks. This session, by the way, 9 minutes each. If you do the math, it's about 40 minutes. But as I said, you have to be present to win the grand prize, okay? All right. So the first Connect talker, if I could, his name is Alex Tourk. And did somebody applaud for Alex already? I might as well just sit down then. Alex is a career political strategist and community organizer with deep relationships to San Francisco's government, community, and business sectors. As Deputy Chief of Staff to the Mayor of San Francisco, Alex created and implemented Project Homeless Connect, a unique civic initiative that has now been adopted by over 200 cities worldwide, where 5 times a year the homeless in San Francisco receive vital services from this public and private partnership. Pretty amazing story, and I'm sure he'll share a little bit about that. Alex launched Ground Floor Public Affairs in March 2007 after 15 years in the public sector, having served under 2 mayoral administrations and played an integral role in 5 successful mayoral campaigns. He specializes in serving as a bridge between private sector, government, nonprofits, and the diverse neighborhoods and communities in the San Francisco area. Alex today is going to share with us some thoughts about his work that is largely aimed at bringing San Francisco's tech companies into the process about talking and actually doing social change. So it's something that I'm very excited about, the possibilities of doing that same sort of thing in San Mateo County. And so let's give it up for hashtag Alex Tourk.
Thank you, Supervisor. Appreciate it. What a warm introduction. Thank you, Kevin and Warren, for having me here this afternoon. It's nice to see all of you. You got a little glimpse into my background, but I'll just go over it briefly. So I've been in the Bay Area for about 21 years. Worked in government and politics for about 15 of those years. So I kind of bounced back and forth between running campaigns and then going into government with those candidates who became elected officials. So I kind of rose through the ranks of government, was a department head, head of neighborhood services for Willie Brown, became Deputy Chief of Staff for Mayor Newsom. So built some real relationships both within the community and within government and within business. And, you know, again, after 15 years, I decided to jump into the private sector and take the risk, and it was honestly the best move I ever made. But what I found when I was Deputy Chief of Staff, the mayor was the youngest mayor in San Francisco in 100 years. And as it is today and has been for, you know, a quarter of a century, homelessness is a serious issue impacting San Francisco. And I remember on day one, I'm unpacking my boxes, and the mayor walks in and says, "I just want you to know you're going to be my point person on homelessness." I said, "You know, you have a Department of Public Health, that's a $2 billion agency. You have the Human Services Agency, that's a $1 billion agency that have experts that deal in this issue. Why me?" And he said, "Well, we need an organizer. We need someone who's going to bring people together around new ideas and get people to think a little bit differently." And that's where essentially this idea of Project Homeless Connect was born. And it was really the first time that I had used my political skills for social good. And let's just say I warmed up to that idea. I love the idea of bringing sectors together. There's a lot of finger pointing when you're in government. Certainly if anyone follows San Francisco, it's kind of blood sport politics there. There's about 500 people that all talk to each other every single day about, you know, who's taking credit for what and who's stabbing who in the back, and, you know, all those fun little stories that you get to read about in Mateer and Ross. But to actually get things done, it takes rolling up your sleeves and recognizing that government can't do this alone. Even though we have a $9 billion budget in San Francisco that's bigger than some states in the union, So this idea around really what happened on the first day is there were a group of outreach workers that I walked in. I was this new deputy chief of staff. It was like I had the eye roll. Who's this guy? What does he know? We've been through this before. And I walked in and just said, kind of gave them some of the ideas of what we wanted to work on. But I said, what could I do to help you? What could I do to show that we're legitimate? And they said, well, we're out there on the streets reaching out to people in need, and we don't have any way to reach back once I'm talking to an individual to get a van here or to get them to shelter. We have no phones. So just being able to communicate to someone to say this person's in need. So I said, I'll get back to you. I came back a week later. I put 2 cell phones on the table. I said, what else can I do? And it was just this idea that there was something tangible, that it was real. We weren't just talking. It was about doing something. And long story short, it turned into, we took over Bill Graham Civic Auditorium. If anyone's been to the city, it's a huge, massive space, and created this portal to civic engagement on the issue of homelessness. So the idea that companies didn't really want to be involved with homelessness because what was the solution at the end of the day? And it's an issue where a lot of people will walk by. As anyone who's experienced homelessness, sometimes you just don't want to see it. It brings up all kinds of emotion. So it's this idea of how do you create a pathway for an individual to get involved, for a company to get involved, business, government, nonprofit, all working under one roof. And one example was Sprint called me and they said, we hear that there's something going on here. We'd be glad to offer any of the clients that show up that day. We have the best database in the world, and we can help them make a phone call to a lost relative in a different city. And it was amazing just how people had this new opportunity, a new service that all of a sudden Sprint wanted to help homeless people reconnect with their families. So that experience in government, when I got into the private sector, was really what I wanted to do with my career. I managed a lot of campaigns when I started my small business. If there are any small business people in the house, when you start a new entity, you look for revenue where you can get it. And a lot of people wanted to hire me to do their campaigns, including a certain supervisor who's here today. But I came to recognize that I wanted to do something where, again, I was bringing these sectors together around change. And one of my existing clients is an advocacy organization called SF City. That's basically a tech chamber of commerce, for lack of a better term. It started after Mayor Ed Lee was elected. He was appointed in 2011 or 2010, and he ended up, running for office that next year. He ran on jobs, he ran on innovation, and was successful, and really wanted some organized entity around all this kind of new energy and these companies that were moving to San Francisco and all these jobs that were being created. So take it a year later, and I don't know if anyone, read the paper or the Chronicle every day where there was the Google bus protest, the buses coming down here, Genentech and Yahoo, and it was income inequality, and it was the rising rents in San Francisco, and San Francisco's losing their soul, and tech is taking over, and we can't handle capacity. And I was getting all these phone calls of essentially why do people hate us so much? We're creating all these jobs and we're doing all these innovative things. And I've certainly learned in working in politics, when you're explaining, you're losing. And a lot of people were explaining and defensive. And it was at that point that we brought some people together and said, instead of spinning or explaining, why don't we figure something to connect, to do, to roll up our sleeves and show this long-term commitment. And we created a program called Circle to Schools. And it was very basic. There's 123 public schools in San Francisco. And so what we did was essentially create a mechanism of a kind of a crawl before you walk way to connect tech companies to the diverse populations of students in San Francisco, where you're not just connecting to the students, but you're connecting to the teachers and the administrators and the presidents of the PTA groups and the community groups. And I think there's a false perception when you hear about all these major tech brands that there's all this money, and everyone who's looking to tech wants checks and money, and I want laptops for every kid and things of that nature. Well, there's really only a handful of these companies that have that kind of resources. A lot of them are rich on paper, but what they do have is human capital. And it seemed to me and to some others that what was lacking was a connectivity. You know, every new group that comes to San Francisco, it's always like I got here first. And there's a resistance to change in San Francisco, and it goes back, hundreds of years. But it was this idea of how do you create something tangible? So what we did was there were 3 tickets to entry to be involved with Circle to Schools. One is that the company would agree to sit down with the principal and to figure out what they needed. So company X doesn't come in and say, we're going to fix your school by doing whatever. To actually sit down with the principal and figure out what they need. Because guess what? It might not be anything that necessarily has to do with tech. But there's some resources that they might need. Books or mentors or tutors or whatever it might be. So that was 1, to connect with the principal. 2, it was to agree to 3 to 5 events/activities over the course of a year. So no one-offs. No, we're going to paint the wall, walk in with our t-shirt and our logo, take a nice picture, and never come back. There would have to be an ongoing commitment. And then finally, we brought in a nonprofit partner called the San Francisco Ed Fund that was formerly San Francisco School Volunteers. It's been around for 50 years. They are all about the logistics. It's not easy to volunteer in a school. Fingerprinted, background check. I mean, not anyone can just walk into a school and start volunteering. So they make that transition seamless. So the last ask of the company was a $5,000 donation to the nonprofit, not to the advocacy organization, that's tax deductible, that allows the program to scale. Well, we started with 5 a year ago, May. And I'll just give you one example to just show the power of what's possible. So I have 1 minute left. Dang. Yeah, I can't tell that story in a minute. There's no way that's going to happen. So I guess to where we are is it's been 18 months. And as I said, there's 123 schools. We have 52 of these partnerships in San Francisco. So 52 companies and schools linked together doing all kinds of different work. And the great thing about the program is it's organic. That each relationship is different. Each relationship grows and thrives in its own way. But where I think it will leave the legacy is, again, it's not about that company, that tech industry, or it's Google or Twitter. It's about Bob, who works at one of these companies, who's volunteering in the schools, who's helping connect to these communities in the hopes that these kids, and a large percentage of them, can represent the future workforce in San Francisco. So again, thank you for having me. I could clearly talk about this for a long time, but I really appreciate the opportunity. So have a great afternoon.
All right, Alex Tourk.